Success doesn't always come from the source that you'd expect. It's something that I'm reasonably familiar with, since I sometimes spend the best part of a month planning a video only for people to then react with indifference, whereas I farted videos out in a couple of days that people have fallen in love with, so I guess what I'm saying is that YouTube is a roulette wheel and none of us know what we're doing. This applies very nicely to video games as well, since any franchise worth its salt has likely been the launch point for at least one spin-off franchise, and when that spin-off franchise does really well and produce surprisingly high numbers, I guess you'll take it. What fascinates me the most about spin-off franchises is that they can explore new ideas and genres that the main series would never touch, and a benefit of this is that it brings in new fans and players who wouldn't have otherwise gone anywhere near the main series. So, you can use creative freedom to increase profits. And everyone's a winner. And yet, like any new creation that sees unexpected success and runs rampantly out of control, it's very easy to forget where it comes from. You don't actually have to care where a spin-off franchise comes from in order to enjoy it, but maybe you're a big fan and you're curious to find out that there's in fact a whole series of games that you're missing out on. If it isn't general knowledge, it can feel like you've discovered hidden gems that are loosely related to games that you really like, and from my point of view, it can be intriguing to dissect why a spin-off ended up overshadowing the main series and how it can be replicated in the future. Would you rather play another cookie-cutter Call of Duty game or an avant-garde risk-taking spin-off? Let the creativity flow through you, you'll be better off for it. I can't pretend to understand the inner workings of a board of directors. They catch a lot of flack for making decisions that impact the creativity of the people below them in the hierarchy, and sometimes deciding to support a totalitarian police state since your game is losing players and apparently relying on that country is the only way to make money, even if it runs counter to all the philosophies present in said video game and your company at large, at least in theory. Oops! It's hard to have sympathy for executives since they earn so much for doing so little, but their jobs are defined by their ability to make money, which is often very tricky and so reliant on regurgitating current trends. So while I can sit here and say that replacing a character as iconic as Rayman with some crazed bunny rabbits wasn't the best idea, there's plenty of evidence to suggest otherwise. But what price would you put on your soul? With a name like mine, you'd think I'd be head over heels in love with the Rabbids, and yeah, I think I was at some point. In order to drum up anticipation for Rayman Raving Rabbids, Ubisoft released some marketing videos for a fledgling YouTube, showcasing the game's psychotic rabbit villains in a way that really endeared the Rabbids with onlookers. People loved how much character they had, especially compared to Rayman, and so, naturally, Ubisoft started to lean more and more into their more colourful mascots, eventually choosing to leave out Rayman entirely for Rabbids Gone Home. Since then, the Rabbids have forged their own little empire of spin-off games, and were even invited to share the screen with the Mario Bros a couple of years ago. Something that fans of Rayman could only ever dream of. Financially, it was a great decision to allow the Rabbids to surpass Rayman, but somewhat surprisingly, it was a good idea for the future of Rayman games as well. It allowed Ubisoft to relax and recontextualize its franchise going forward, and hey, that gave us two of the best platformers you're ever likely to play, so I suppose everyone's happy. Still a bit of a strange one though, because Ubisoft knew what they were trying to do by putting the Rabbids first, but I don't think anyone could have imagined how well it would work for both franchises. Now put Rayman in Smash Bros and the cycle is complete. The slight problem with the Rabbids is the perceived stealing of the spotlight from Rayman. We now know that this came about in order to enforce a hiatus on Rayman, but at the time, with these repetitive minigame compilations coming out year after year with no Rayman in sight, the Rabbids did start to have diminishing returns, and it is awkward being called RabbidLuigi with everyone presuming that you really love the Rabbids, and once upon a time, I did, but they do start to grate after a while. They're pretty good. Mobile games change everything. If you've spent years or even decades making one type of game for one type of demographic, putting it on a mobile device is often a huge boom because billions of people own smartphones, and if some of them just happen to want to play Pokemon and would be willing to download a mobile version of that, you've got the recipe for lots and lots of money. I feel like I can't accurately describe what a phenomenon Pokemon Go was a few years ago. Most people watching this will be old enough to remember one pretty magical summer where Pokemon experienced a resurgence in popularity, the likes of which hadn't been seen since the franchise's initial bounce in the 90s. Pokemon has never lacked momentum and has always been one of Nintendo's most potent weapons, but you only have to look at the numbers to understand how Pokemon Go could possibly overshadow such a significant franchise. The total copies sold for the entire catalogue of Pokemon is roughly 240 million, whereas Pokemon Go, as of July of this year, stands at approximately 1 billion downloads. Just the 4 times more popular than the whole franchise. Well, fuck me. Pokemon Go got by and continues to get by on a combination of ridiculous accessibility and a dose of bulletproof nostalgia that resurrected interest in a property that many people had let go sometime after the first generation. The interesting side effect is how its popularity fed back into the main series of Pokemon, since Pokemon Go was closely followed by Sun and Moon, and suddenly millions of people had been reminded how much fun Pokemon could be, which might be why Sun and Moon had the most pre-orders of any Nintendo game back in 2016. That was the year in which Nintendo was slowly starting to turn their string of poor decisions around after a pretty shocking 2015, and I think you can owe a lot to Niantic's perfectly imperfect mobile game. There was a lot of goodwill surrounding Nintendo, and then they capitalized on that with the Switch, and look where they are now. It was bizarre seeing Pokemon everywhere in the news and it being the relevant topic of discussion after years of relative obscurity, and I never thought it would get back there thanks to something so simple. All of that success just from poking some Mongos. I think I speak for most people when I say, what the fuck is a Drakengard? Apparently it's a series of video games from the early 2000s that went as far as a third game in 2013, but none of these games sold particularly well, so they're not exactly propping up a corner of pop culture. But I can't sit here and say that they're not interesting games that tackle fascinating themes like lasting effects of war and death and the danger of unchecked immorality. If this sounds like the kind of pretentious mental gymnastics that wouldn't seem out of place in a Yoko Taro personal pleasure project, then funnily enough, you don't know how true that is. Might seem strange that Drakengard could be related to Nier, but I guess when you consider that they do tackle similar themes and form a relatively cohesive narrative from one game to the next, everything starts to fit into place like a satisfying jigsaw puzzle. The crucial detail here is that Drakengard came first, spawned Nier, and that Nier Automata sold like fucking hotcakes. This man having more money makes me happy for some strange reason. I hadn't even heard of Drakengard by the time that someone told me what a crazy experience Nier is, and even then I, like many others, didn't get anywhere near this series before Nier Automata. This game in particular acted as a brilliant catalyst for players to discover the Drakengard games, since this perfect marriage between Yoko Taro's insane ideas and Platinum Games' proclivity for hectic hack-and-slash combat acts as a very encouraging springboard. Granted, the Drakengard games and even the original Nier are far removed from the type of game that Automata is, but if you find yourself caught up in the intricate narrative and want some more games that tackle similar themes, and even throw in the occasional reference to a YouTube channel called RabbidLuigi, where you can subscribe if you're enjoying the video and click the bell for notifications of every new video, despite the fact that this has nothing to do with Drakengard, then it's good to know that there's a small pile of games that not a ton of people have touched that can do a job for you too. I still don't know what a Drakengard is though. If you think about it for way too long, Mario is a gigantic clusterfuck of spin-offs. Not so much with any of the actual spin-offs, but Mario himself was originally the start of a game called Donkey Kong, so by that logic, every main series Mario game is in fact a spin-off of one game from 1981. I'm not about to do that, since it comes with a lot of implications, and to imply that Mario has surpassed the original Donkey Kong in both sales and popularity is one of the most obvious statements in the entirety of human history. So I'm not going to say that Mario is a spin-off of Donkey Kong, even if it technically is, because there's enough stats and sales figures to suggest that the main series of Mario games has in fact been surpassed by one of its own spin-offs. Platformers might be where Mario cut his teeth, but karting is what made him a star. Mario may have gotten his start as a platforming icon and continues to add to his hugely impressive library of Game of the Year contenders, But platformers are a little trickier to sell to the average person on the street. You know, you jump around, you defeat bad guys, including this large, spiky turtle man, and hey, that's fine. But it's really easy to convince someone to play a racing game with items and bullshit. Is this controversial? I'm going to suggest this is mildly controversial. How wild is it that Mario Kart has soared past Mario platformers for popularity? You can explain it away as Mario Kart having a greater appeal for casual players, but I honestly think it goes a bit deeper than that. You have to go all the way back to the days of the DS to find a console where a Mario Kart game was outsold by the relevant Mario platformer. With the Wii U, the 3DS and the Switch so far, a Mario Kart game has been the best-selling game on all of these consoles, with Mario Kart 8 alone accounting for over 27 million copies sold in all its different forms. The remarkable thing is that Mario has had some huge platformers released in that time, but his karting spin-offs always find a way to rise above them and pull in even more impressive sales figures. Despite their respective qualities, I don't think you'd find many people out there that would say that Mario Kart is Nintendo's best franchise, but at this point, it's undoubtedly Nintendo's most important IP. Yeah, apparently it isn't Mario, but it might just be Mario Kart instead. That flies in the face of everything I thought I knew. Over the last quarter, Mario Kart Wii sold another 40,000 copies for some reason, so the staying power of this franchise should never be called into question. Though, if Mario Kart Tour keeps using shitty microtransactions to squeeze pennies out of players at every possible convenience, who's to say that public perception won't drastically shift? It's not best to rest on your laurels. When I was thinking up ideas for this video, I kept coming back to the same trait that I wanted to see more of. I find it fascinating that a game can be a spin-off and yet be so successful, so uncharacteristically thriving for what we understand spin-offs to be, that the public perception is one of surprise that this franchise is a spin-off of something else. When any series really gets into its stride and branches off into its own world full of exciting ideas and refreshing inspiration, it can be a little tricky to trace it back to its origins. You take the average person on the street who happens to know about Persona, and how likely is it that A, they'll know that Persona is a spin-off franchise, and B, what that spin-off franchise is called? Because I didn't know not that long ago. For the record, it's the Megami Tensei series, which can trace its origins back to the late 1980s with a Japanese-only Famicom game that was based on a trilogy of novels by author Aya Nishitani. The RPGs that followed on from this helped to refine some really interesting ideas, like being able to catch and fuse the monsters you encounter, and since the first Megami Tensei apparently sold well, there's no sales figures to back that up, but whatever, we move. Atlus had a ton of freedom over where they could take the series next. That direction was to make Shin Megami Tensei If, which took place in a school, and lots of people liked that about it. So what followed 2 years later was only natural, I suppose. Officially titled Shin Megami Tensei Persona, it is perfectly understandable if you didn't know about that first bit, since Atlus themselves have attempted to distance the Persona franchise from Megami Tensei. The franchises are technically connected, but not by any story link, since they operate in separate worlds with different characters and no crossovers between the two at any stage. The similarities come on a more mechanical level, since both franchises are RPGs that retain the whole catching monsters thing, but things have gone a little more successfully with Persona. Since Persona 3 especially, as that title introduced social links that let you build relationships with your teammates and help to develop characters in a way that really resonated with Western audiences. Nowadays, Persona as a series has outsold its parent franchise, Persona 5 is one of the best JRPGs you'll ever play, and Persona is enough of a household name to have a Smash Bros rep. The title says Overshadow. It should say Annihilate. This is RabbidLuigi, and when you stop and think about it, it is a little crazy how well Persona has done for itself. There was an 8-year gap between the 4th and the 5th game, at which point a handful of Megami Tensei games were released, but they were mostly smaller RPGs for the 3DS. Meanwhile, Persona is getting big budget releases for large consoles and raking in a ton of money. Hopefully, now that Atlus are in a very comfortable position, they don't feel the need to reevaluate themselves and take more risks. Maybe don't take 8 years for the next one though. Have you got a topic that you'd like me to talk about next week? Make sure you leave a comment about that down below because I'll be taking the most interesting suggestions and making a poll on the next video. In fact, here's one right now that I prepared from last week. I'll be revealing the winner of the poll on Twitter and taking suggestions for games to talk about that are related to that topic. So feel free to follow me over there so we can keep in touch. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.